I never wanted to be a hero. I'm not the kind of man who faces the unknown with bravery or conviction. But here I am, floating in the icy darkness of space, aboard a rusty landing capsule, heading toward something that shouldn't exist. The Erebus 7 space station is down there, silent and forgotten, like a corpse abandoned in the void. And me? I'm just the fool who came to poke at its secrets. It all started with the reports. People disappearing without a trace. Emergency calls, abruptly cut off. Intermittent life signals coming from the lower levels of the station, where no one should have been for years. Purple Lagoon sent me to investigate. They said it was routine, but I knew it wasn't. When a corporation like that uses the word routine, it means something is very wrong. The descent was smooth, at least until I entered the station's artificial atmosphere. The outer hull was corroded, covered in layers of cosmic dust and marks from old impacts. It looked like a floating tomb, but there was something else there. Something alive. Or maybe something pretending to be dead. As soon as I landed, I realized the artificial gravity was unstable. My footsteps echoed through the deserted corridors, each sound reverberating as if the station itself was watching me. The lighting panels flickered irregularly, casting distorted shadows on the metallic walls. It was impossible not to feel that. Something was wrong. The air had a strange smell like old metal mixed with something organic and rotten. Each breath felt heavier than the last. I found the first signs of life, or rather, death, within the first few minutes. A body, or what was left of it, lay on the floor next to a sealed door. Its uniform was torn and its skin bore strange marks, as if something had tried to peel it off. But what really froze me in place were the eyes, or rather, the absence of them. The sockets were empty, like black holes sucking away any hope of logic. On the communicator, the robotic voice of the station's AI kept repeating, "Attention, containment protocol breached. Lower levels compromised." Containment of what? I didn't know yet, but something told me I didn't want to find out. That's when I heard the first sound, a steady dripping coming from somewhere below me. Water? Here? In space? I followed, the sound to a half-open hatch that led to the station's sewers. I hesitated for a moment. I knew that whatever was down there wasn't something I should face, but I also knew I had no choice. My curiosity, or maybe my stupidity, has always been my greatest flaw. When I opened the hatch, the smell nearly knocked me over. It was like rotting flesh mixed with something chemical, something that burned my nostrils and churned my stomach. The dripping grew louder, echoing off the damp, slime-covered walls. And then I saw it. Or rather, I felt its presence. A shapeless, pulsating mass covered in distorted human faces. Faces silently screaming, staring at me with eyes that begged for release. This wasn't just a creature, it was an anomaly, a biological error that shouldn't exist, and somehow I knew it was watching me. That it knew who I was. That it knew what I had done. "You already know the price," whispered a voice inside my head. It wasn't mine. It was hers. The thing in the sewers. I didn't respond. I couldn't. All I could do was look at those faces and wonder how many of them were real. How many of them had once been people like me? And how many of them were still alive, trapped in that prison of mutant flesh? I knew there was something bigger behind all this. Something Purple Lagoon never mentioned. Something that perhaps was better left buried. But it was too late now. I'd already seen too much. And somehow I knew that thing, that Hydra of 1,000 faces, was only just beginning. I shouldn't have gone down. The sewers of Erebus 7 are a suffocating humid labyrinth, a network of dark tunnels that reek of death and despair. The air is thick, as if it's saturated with something alive, something that breathes slowly, crawling along the walls while you try to ignore the constant dripping sound. Every step I take echoes like thunder in the oppressive silence, but there's another sound too, something lower, deeper, almost imperceptible. It's like the pulsing of an enormous heart, distant yet present, as if the very space around me is alive. I can't help but look behind me. The feeling of being watched is unbearable. There's something at the edges of my vision. Something that vanishes the moment I try to focus on it. But the shadows are there. Always there. Moving too fast to be caught by the human eye, yet slow enough for me to know they want me to see them. They want me to know they're following me. The first body I find is fused to the wall. No, fused isn't the right word. It's been melded. Its limbs are stretched at impossible angles, as if molded into some grotesque nightmare. Its skin is covered in a viscous, translucent substance, hardened over time but still wet to the touch. It feels wrong, as if human flesh had been transformed into something entirely different. Beneath the layer of mucus, something glimmers, reflecting the faint light from my flashlight. Bones. But not just bones. There are patterns carved into them, like scriptures or ancient symbols, etched directly into the bone tissue. I don't know what they mean, but every time I look at them, I feel a sharp pain at the base of my skull, as if something is trying to force its way out of my mind. I keep moving because going back isn't an option. My communicator is silent. Any attempt to contact the surface results only in static. But the static isn't normal. It has a rhythm, as if it's a language, a voice, a whisper that says things I can't quite understand but that resonate deeply within me. You already know the price, it repeats, over and over. I don't recognize the voice, but I know I've heard it before. Somewhere. Maybe in a dream. Then I see the monoliths. They're tall, twisted structures made of something that looks like melted glass mixed with decaying flesh. Their surfaces are uneven, pulsating as if alive. As I approach, I realize they're not random formations. They have faces, hundreds of them. Human faces fused together in a grotesque collage of suffering. Some still seem alive, their eyes fluttering slightly, their mouths open in silent screams. Others are deformed, unrecognizable, as if they'd been ripped from their bodies and pressed into the viscous mass until they lost all original form. I touch one of them. I don't know why. Maybe it's morbid curiosity. Maybe it's desperation. The surface is cold but at the same time hot, as if boiling inside. When my fingers graze the material, it reacts. The substance begins to move, to writhe, as if it's alive. And then, for a brief moment, I see my own face reflected in it. But it's not exactly my face. It's distorted, elongated, with eyes far too large and a mouth that opens wider than should be possible. I scream and recoil, but the face remains there, staring back at me, as if trapped inside that thing. That's when I hear the sound. A dripping, but unlike anything I've ever heard. It's not water. It's thicker, denser. It sounds like blood falling into pools on the ground. But when I look down, there's nothing. Just the sound continues, echoing through the tunnels like a slow, irregular drumbeat. And then I see it. The Hydra. It doesn't have a fixed shape. It's a mutant mass, a creature seemingly made entirely of flesh, bones, and human faces. Its tentacles twist and rearrange constantly, forming new patterns, new figures. There's something hypnotic about it, something that forces me to keep looking even though I know I shouldn't. Each tentacle ends in a face, and each face stares at me with eyes that seem to beg for help, or perhaps for vengeance. Some of the faces are familiar. I recognize Holloway, the missing diver. He's there, his expression frozen in a silent scream, his empty eyes accusing me of something I'm not sure of. But the worst part isn't that. The worst part is what it does with the bodies. There are human remains scattered across the floor, but they're not simply abandoned. The Hydra uses them. It molds them, transforms them into parts of itself. I see broken arms being stitched into its tentacles, legs being fused into its base. There are heads that still move, still blink, still scream silently as they're absorbed into the viscous mass. And then I see something that makes me freeze completely. I don't know exactly when I realized that the Erebus 7 station was as rotten as the bodies in the sewers. Maybe it was when I saw the abandoned laboratories, still humming with equipment, their red warning lights blinking even after years of disuse. Or maybe it was before that, when I started noticing the behavior of the survivors, those few who still hid in the shadows of the upper towers, pretending they were better than the dead below. But let's start from the beginning. Erebus 7 wasn't just any space station. It was a project funded by the elite of Purple Lagoon, an organization that sold dreams of progress while feeding its own nightmares. Here, scientists, engineers, and even mercenaries worked together to push the boundaries of humanity, or rather to shatter them completely. They weren't interested in saving lives or improving the world. No, that would have been too noble for them. They wanted control, power, answers to questions no human being should ever ask. The laboratories were divided into sectors, each more sinister than the last. On level 4, there were biological testing chambers where hybrid creatures were developed, grotesque mixtures of human and animal DNA. On level 6, machines attempted to replicate artificial intelligences so advanced they could replace entire governments. And on level 8, well, no one talked about level 8. They said it was where the anomalies happened, where things like the Hydra were created. But who were these people? They weren't just scientists. They weren't just rich. They were something worse. They were corrupt idealists, men and women who had sold their souls for a seat at the table of gods. Some were brilliant, yes, but their genius was corroded by greed. Others were simply parasites, opportunists who knew they could profit from the suffering of others. And then there were the financiers, the true owners of Erebus 7. They never appeared in person, but their marks were everywhere. Golden Purple Lagoon logos engraved on the walls, consoles with coded names of secret projects, contracts signed in figurative and perhaps literal blood. I met some of them during my investigation. Or rather, I found their remains. On level 3, I discovered a laboratory where the experiments seemed to have spiraled out of control. The walls were covered in inscriptions made with something that looked like black ink, but which I knew was dried blood. There were hastily scribbled diagrams showing organic structures that made no sense. On a desk I found a notebook. The pages were crumpled, torn in places, but still legible. One sentence caught my attention. The line between creation and destruction is illusory. If we can control pain, we can control everything. Who wrote that? I don't know. But I can imagine their face, eyes glazed with ambition, hands trembling as they injected poisons into human test subjects, justifying every atrocity with pretty words like progress and evolution. And me? Am I different from them? No, I am also guilty. I didn't come here just because I was sent. I came because I needed money, because I needed to prove something to myself, because I wanted to be important. For years I worked for corporations like Purple Lagoon, doing the dirty work no one else wanted to do, investigating disasters, covering up accidents, lying to families who would never see their loved ones again, all for the right price. And now here I am, walking the corridors of Erebus 7, seeing the results of what men like me helped create. The people who still live here are the last remnants of that madness. They aren't innocent. None of them. Some pretend to be victims, but I see through their masks. I see the calculating glint in their eyes when they think I'm not looking. I see how they scurry through the corridors like rats fleeing a flood, always searching for a way to survive, even if it means betraying others. A woman stopped me once. She said she knew what was happening in the sewers. She said she had seen the Hydra grow, fed by failed experiments. When I asked why she hadn't fled, she smiled, a cold, calculating smile. Because, she said, I think it might be useful. Useful. That word echoed in my mind for hours. Useful for what? To destroy? To control? To purge? Later, I discovered that this woman had been one of the masterminds behind the initial Hydra project. She had overseen the first tests, injecting mutagenic substances into political prisoners and dissidents. Now she was trapped here, waiting for the creature she helped create to solve her problems for her. That's when I realized The Hydra wasn't just a biological anomaly. It was a reflection, a distorted mirror of Erebus 7 itself, of Purple Lagoon, of all of us. I don't know exactly when I realized I was lost. Not physically. I still knew where I was, at least in the most basic sense. Dark corridors, viscous sewers, the Hydra always lurking. But mentally, spiritually, I no longer had any certainty of who I was or what remained of me. Each step I took seemed to sink me deeper into the rot of Erebus 7. It was as if the air were poisoned, saturated with something that corroded not just bodies, but souls. And the more I saw, the more I understood that the thing in the sewers wasn't just a creature. It was a reflection, a distorted mirror of everything humanity had done to get here. But then came the choice, the final decision I knew I'd have to face from the moment I set foot on this damned station. I found the control room almost by accident. I had been following the slimy trails left by the Hydra, trying to understand its patterns of movement, when I stumbled upon a semi-open blast door. Inside, there was a series of old consoles covered in dust and rust, but still functional. In the center of the room, a terminal blinked with an intermittent red light. A message appeared on the screen. As soon as I touched the keyboard, self-destruct protocol activated. Time remaining 10 minutes. My heart froze. Self-destruction? Who had programmed this? When? And more importantly, why? But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A security camera connected to the system showed live footage of the lower levels. There it was, the Hydra, larger than ever, its mutant forms spreading through the tunnels like the roots of an evil tree, and it was rising. Slowly but inexorably it was heading for the surface. I knew what would happen if it got there. The few survivors still hiding in the upper towers would be consumed, just like all the others before them. Their faces would fuse into the creature's viscous mass, their silent screams echoing forever through the station's corridors. And me? I'd be next. There were 2 buttons on the console. One was marked with a simple symbol, an explosion. The other had no marking, just a smooth black surface, as if made of the same material that composed the Hydra. The first button would detonate the sewers, sealing the creature away forever. At least that's what I hoped. The explosion would destroy most of the station, including any chance of saving the survivors. But at least the Hydra would be contained. The second button, well, I didn't know what it would do, but something inside me whispered that it was exactly what the creature wanted, that I should press that button. You already know the price, the voice said again, this time so clear it seemed to come from the very air around me. I looked at the camera screen. The Hydra was closer now. I could see its tentacles sliding through the corridors, leaving trails of slime that gleamed under the dim lights. And then among the fused faces in its mass, I saw something that made me freeze. It was my face. Not as I was now, but as I would be. Distorted, elongated, with eyes too large and a mouth that seemed to scream eternally. It was as if the creature had already absorbed me, as if I were already part of it. You are already part of this, the voice whispered. From the moment you stepped here, you belong to me. I knew it was right. I had known it from the start. All the corruption, all the greed, all the blood I had ignored in the name of progress or money, it had all brought me here. I was no better than the scientists who created the Hydra, no better than the financiers who paid for it. I was just another link in the chain. But then something changed. I thought about the people who were still alive up there, the survivors who pretended to be better than the dead. The hypocrites who justified their actions with pretty words while doing exactly what they criticized in others. Did they deserve to be saved? I didn't know. But I knew the Hydra wasn't just a threat. It was a force of balance. A punishment. And maybe, just maybe, it was the only thing capable of exposing the true face of humanity. I looked at the 2 buttons again. My hand trembled as it hovered over the first one. Just a touch. 10 seconds, and it would all be over. But then I remembered. The words written on the piece of paper I found clutched in the severed arm. Don't let her rise. I chuckled softly. Whoever had written that didn't understand. The Hydra was already rising. She always had been. From the moment she was created, she was destined to surface. I pressed the second button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, I felt the floor tremble. A deep, almost musical sound echoed through the corridors. It was as if the station itself were singing. I ran back to the upper levels, but not to escape, to watch. When I reached the main hall, I saw the survivors gathered there. Some were armed, others prayed, others shouted orders that no one obeyed. But they all stopped when they heard the sound. And then she emerged. The Hydra burst from the floor like a malignant flower, its tentacles enveloping everything around it. People began to scream, but it was too late. She consumed them one by one, fusing their faces into her mutant mass. I watched from afar, unmoving. I knew my turn would come soon. When she finally reached me, I didn't resist. I let her tentacles wrap around me, let her viscous substance cover me. I felt a sharp pain, as if 1,000 needles were piercing my skin, but it passed quickly. And then I saw her, on the other side of the glass. I was there, outside, looking in. My face was just one more in the crowd of distorted faces. But for the first time I smiled because now I understood. The Hydra wasn't evil, she was the truth.
The Erebus 7 station is declared lost by Purple Lagoon. Official reports claim it was destroyed due to structural failures. But rumors persist about something that lived in the sewers and punished the guilty somewhere. Jonas exists as part of the Hydra, his consciousness diluted among the hundreds of faces that make up the creature. He is not dead, but he is no longer alive either. He is now an eternal witness to human corruption. This would be a great item for my collection.